Right, good evening. Could I begin by asking we stand in a minute of silence for Roger Blishen. He was present at our September meeting and unfortunately passed away recently. My name is Councillor Stephen Mulliner and I'm the chair of this meeting. I'm assisted by my vice chairman, Councillor Joan Hegan, and Mark Mills, our scrutiny officer, and Kitty Charlemagne as our clerk for the evening. We have a number of apologies, I think.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor David Elts, Councillor Peter Martin, Councillor John Neal and Councillor George Wilson.
Are there any declarations of interest?
There have been no declarations of interest made.
And none I see, thank you. The minutes for the meeting held on the 7th of November have been published on the Council's website. Has anyone any comments as to their accuracy? If not, thank you. Are there any questions from members of the public?
We have not received any questions, I'm afraid.
Or from members?
None from members.
Good, thank you very much. We move on then to item 6, which is the corporate performance report for Q2. Tom, do you wish to say anything in introduction or just leave it to the heads of service?
We weren't planning to do an introduction, Chairman, although I would say that apologies, there is an amendment which is out there in hard copy for the housing delivering communities summary, which was inaccurate in your agenda, and this is the version that you should be looking at. So
yes, when I read it, I got a strong sense of deja vu and then checked. In some ways, as we've had the interim meeting on the 7th of November, a certain amount of this is fairly familiar. Does anyone have any comments on the finance section? Councillor Hegan.
Sorry, Chair, are we talking about the Chief Executive summary?
Any part of it is open for comment.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions, please. From my past experience in mergers and acquisitions, some mergers did not incur any loss of staff. They were gained through intellectual synergy and best practice. I note that apparently most of the savings seems to be coming from staff. I would like to know if there are any attempts to gain intellectual synergy and best practice through this merger. The other question I've got as regards to the merger is, are we looking at asset similarity and trying to identify if there's any hidden traps in the merger? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's meant to be a collaboration rather than a merger, but perhaps the Chief Executive would like to comment.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Edmonds. So I suppose I'd just take you back to the full council resolution, which was that we would proceed with a collaboration with Guildford Borough Council on the basis of a shared joint management team. And that is what we've done. The council didn't agree to go any further than that, but it did say that the joint management team should then work up business cases on a service by service basis for future collaboration. So we've achieved the milestone that the council set out. We're now starting to prepare the methodology for further business cases to come forward. And it's at that point that some of the questions that Councillor Edmonds raises really come to the fore. I'd also remind you that at the April council meeting this year, you established a joint governance committee as well. That committee will be meeting in December to review two things which are within its terms of reference. Firstly, the inter-authority agreement, which is effectively the contract between the two councils, and whether that is still fit for purpose. And secondly, the risk register that the joint working group worked so hard at the beginning of the year to do. So we're reviewing that in the light of what has happened so far, updating any risks, and that will also include some of the things that Councillor Edmonds refers to. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the clarification.
Right. Any further comments? Councillor Hegan, then Councillor Nicholson.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I'm responding to you opening up the discussion on the finance and property investment part of the agenda. And as I circulated a question earlier regarding the energy rebate scheme and the discretionary element of that, I had thought there was going to be a report in the exec papers that went out last week, but I didn't see it. So I'd like to know what's being proposed on the energy rebate scheme so that we don't give back any underspent money.
Chair, I'm sure that report can be circulated. I'm surprised it hasn't actually.
Sorry, could we have
I'll circulate the executive report to make sure it's available to all members.
Is the short story that it is being extended anyway?
The criteria has been widened to capture more people in need, and we're auto awarding the amount of money that's left. There was 110,000. There was an auto award, and there was to be done on that 110,000 through the expanded criteria, resulting in there was probably, I think, about 4,000 or so pounds left at the end of that, at the end of the auto award. The scheme comes to an end at the end of this month, and we have to have awarded the money by then, or it goes back to government.
I see, thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. Yes, this is on page 24. It's to do with Queensmead, where there's an approval of 1,256,000 and the outturn is 200. Presumably that expenditure will be applied for next year for 0304.
Mr. Vickers.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not entirely familiar with the particular item. Which page is it on?
Sorry, are you referring to the table at the very top of page 24?
That's one moment, I'll have a look.
Or is this one you want to take under advisement and speak to your HRA colleagues? So who is the best person equipped to answer that?
Thank you, Chairman. I think we better take that one back and consult with finance colleagues. I'm not exactly sure.
Yes, if you could copy the members of the
course,
committee with
yes,
the reply.
We will do.
Thank
that,
you very
Chairman.
much, Peter.
Yes.
On one very minor point, I was interested to see that on page 14, two percentages were quoted in words. I think most of us are slightly more comfortable seeing it as numbers. So that was obviously someone's sort of minor point. And the other one, I see the reference to the savings from the joint management team and the reference to shared executive support. When are we going to know what the extent of that will be, do you think?
Thank you, Chairman. We'll be discussing a report on executive support within the management team over the next week or so.
Thank you. Right. Are there any other questions on anything before business transformation? If not, we have a separate section on business transformation, so I suspect it's best if any questions are left until then. Any questions on 5, 6 or 7? Seven's housing operations.
Sorry, yes, I did have some concerns about the status of the responsive repairs contract, and just the numbers didn't seem to stack up to me. This reference to the being 200 overdues being expected and manageable, but the KPI HO5B is showing only 14% incompletes after 28 days. And just as a small point on the report preparation, that 14% shown as green, but actually it is still below the 10% target. So could we just have a comment on what's actually happening in responsive repairs, and is it really getting better?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that should be red, not green. So I can certainly ask for that to be amended. The new contract on responsive repair started on the 1st of April this year, and we're not yet meeting the targets, and there is a phrase of gentle improvement. Gentle is a positive word. I would say there is some improvement, and certainly I was at a meeting with the contractor and our customer services team and various officers a couple of weeks ago, and things are improving. I think it's important to notice that this is a new contract. We do want to improve services. There was a backlog. The responsive repairs, the contractor came to the Landlord Services Advisory Board in September and spoke about the plans that the contractor had in place for dealing with the backlog and improving service. That is available online. He'll be coming again to the Landlord Services Board in January. So what I would say is that there is a hill to climb and we are taking steps, but we've a way to go.
Thank you. Is there any sign that the difficulties in recruiting operatives for flooring, roofing and groundworks, is that improving or is it basically static?
I think that's improving, Chairman, but again, it's slow. Again, in our own service, recruiting compliance officers is difficult because there simply are not the candidates out there. And so that is something we're continually keeping under review.
So by that, do you mean anyone coming forward or people of adequate standard?
People of adequate standard. And in fact, in some cases, no one at all.
Can you clarify the how the strategic asset manager post is being covered at the moment? You refer to an internal interim resource. What's actually happening?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So Heather Rigg, our housing operations manager, is covering that role until the 31st of December. Then Hugh Wagstaff, who remains with us, he will be taking on the asset manager's role from the 1st of January 2023 and driving that work forward.
Is he likely to be effectively full-time on that?
Yes.
The other question that I put around this morning is to do with the notices seeking repossession. And there's a mention of a figure of 18, but I don't have any context for that, how it compares historically. How many of those actually result in eviction historically, and is there any change in approach for this to reflect the cost of living crisis?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that's a very good question. I think the notice of seeking possession is simply that, and if we go back for a few years, in 2018-19 we issued 233 notices to seek possession, and in the end we evicted 2 households. 2019-20, 222 notices, there were 5 evictions. 2021, 17 notices, no evictions. And in 21-22, 60 and 1 eviction. We weren't able to do any notices or evictions during the pandemic. And after that, we revised the way that we looked at this. The team see an eviction as a failure of the service. And we're working much more proactively with our tenants to maintain homes with affordable repayment plans. The previous eviction for this particular year was where the tenant abandoned their home. The cost of living crisis is clearly a factor, and we have that tenant-centred approach to support, advice and signpost our tenants when they are in difficulty. So to answer the question, really the notice is a warning shot across the bow. They very, very rarely result in evictions. And because of the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, much more work is done with our tenants, and it's my aim that we don't have any evictions.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we could look at, well, page 8 on the replaced section 8 dealing with housing delivery. When are we going to see what variances there are on the capital programme? Because I was under the impression that the strategic review process had been completed, and so presumably we're fairly near to knowing what changes there will be in the capital position. Paragraph 863 has the text.
So, Chairman, what we'll endeavour to do is actually just expand that for you in the next round. Actually, I can have it done after this meeting and circulated to show you what's genuine underspend on a project and what is actually just profiling of the expenditure. What you've got there is the approved budget for the project. Spend to date is against that, but that project may expand more than one financial year.
Do you expect there to be forecast variances on most of the items there in due course?
I think it's realistic that there will be, just by the nature of them.
Thanks.
Yes, I wanted to go back to the recruitment issue because that seems to be the nub of a lot of the red. So you've said it's very difficult, but is there is the salary an issue? Is there something? I mean, what are we going to be doing to make it that we can actually recruit somebody?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Howard. I think we're looking at salaries. That's certainly an issue, and the possibility of market supplements. We've done a benchmarking exercise with other councils and housing associations. It's not a one size fits all. People do compliance in different ways, but we're coming to a point now where we can put forward a case for market supplements. Hopefully, we will attract candidates. We do have officers within the service who are very good, but we can't stretch them too thinly. And so we're looking at salary, and we're hoping that that will attract a pool of candidates that we can interview. But it is difficult, and it's difficult across the sector.
That's reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the corporate performance? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you. Is the cost of accommodation in the area a significant bar to recruitment? If so, can we overcome it by remote working? Thank you.
I think the cost of accommodation is always an issue in Waverley for those on low to moderate and even reasonably high incomes. There's only so much work you can do on compliance by working remotely because you have to visit properties. Although I would say that our property services manager lives out of the borough and manages her workload extremely well by coming up here and staying for a number of days a month. So yes, it is possible. Certainly the cost of property here and the lack of a good private rented sector, rents that are affordable, it's always going to be an issue, I think, because of the price of accommodation in this part of the country.
Councillor Howard.
The other area where I saw we've got a lot of red and I get numerous complaints about is on page 62, which was around the planning and dealing. And I know recruitment's been a big issue there as well with staff, but I wondered. People
I think to be fair, then that's actually in the services remit planning.
Oh, I got too far, have I? Sorry.
Never go too far.
Think
But,
ahead.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, you're correct. That's for the other committee technically, but it is a wider corporate issue that we're seeing across a number of professions in terms of recruitment, retention, the economy, the costs of living, and in the proximity of Surrey. All of these things are part of what we're looking at now over the next few months, and indeed every other councillors as well. So for those professions where we're competing mainly with councils, we're finding that we're all competing for a diminishing number of people, and we find that in the repairs area, we find that in planning, a number of our other professions. So it is a corporate risk that we're paying attention to. Councillor Edmonds' suggestion around remote and hybrid working, we've actually got a paper later on this agenda, of course, about that. So that is part of our solution, and indeed collaborating more with other authorities is probably part of it as well in terms of improving our resilience. But it is a increasingly becoming a structural issue for local authorities right now. So Councillor Howard, you certainly alighted on a very real risk for us at the moment that we're working quite hard to counter, and we will see some more effects of this, I think, over the coming year.
Thank you. Anybody else? Not, thank you for that. And we move on to item 7, the work programme, which looks very similar to what it was last time, unsurprisingly. The next big item, obviously, is the budget, which will be our focus in the January meeting. Has anyone got any issues with what they see in that list? Councillor Hegan.
I'm conscious that in the work programme in January, for our January meeting, we have the service plans for next year. And I think that there'll be quite a lot of new stuff for us to look at there as a result of the reorganisation, of understanding where things fit. And I would appreciate the chance, if other members of the committee are agreeable, to actually have some meetings with heads of service before they just present a huge tranche of service plans in the January agenda, which is a busy meeting anyway, and that we try and schedule some discussions in advance to know what's likely to be coming and have some thoughts and input ahead of time.
Perhaps Kizzy can help, or even Robin. I have a memory we actually looked at service plans in the March meeting earlier this year rather than in the January meeting.
Perhaps Kizzy can help with that. I mean, certainly we have often, you as a committee have often looked in January at the service plans en route to agreeing the annual refresh. Clearly, we do have a new management team in place, different responsibilities, different people. They are likely to take a view about how services will be delivered going forward. I'm happy to take away an action chair to go back to the joint management team and advise them that there's interest in speaking to them about the services, and perhaps then come back to you separately with some suggestions as to how the committee could do that.
Thank you. I mean, another possibility which occurs to me is, if the committee has the stamina for it, just as we had in effect a briefing meeting on the 7th of November, which in fact, with the informal briefing that preceded it, was about 2¼ hours, and I think gave those present quite a good insight into the issues. Given what Councillor Hegan has said, and the fact that we have new people in charge of the teams, possibly a couple of those where we perhaps didn't ask more than 3 to turn up and to explain what their thoughts were. As I do agree that this year is likely to be different from previous years. And again, I just wonder whether if we can do that in January before the budget meeting, that would be good. But is it possible to investigate whether that would be feasible?
And I'm reluctant, Chair, to commit my colleagues' time and their work on their behalf. But as I say, I'm very happy to take the request from the committee back into the joint team to let them know that there was an interest in that, and perhaps come back to you as chair of the committee suggesting how that can be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just ask those present whether you feel that would be a useful idea? Yeah, good. Thank you very, very much.
January, since I get back from a 2-week trip the afternoon of the next ONS Resources Committee, so I won't be able to input if it's in January.
I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think that's unlikely to be possible. But bearing in mind that the joint, I mean, Tom may wish to comment, but the joint management team, took post on the 1st of October. There's a huge amount to do. Again, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I do wonder whether December may be pushing it a little bit in terms of getting that level of details. It depends on your expectations as a committee chair.
No, it may be more practical to do that in February and then have a March meeting where in fact we're looking at the proposed service plans with rather more knowledgeable eyes. Right, if there are no more comments on that, item 8 is the update on the Guildford collaboration, which we've already touched on to an extent. Is there anything you'd like to add further?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll just go through a couple of points just to update the committee, and you're right, we have touched on some of this already. Just to note that as Mr. Taylor stated, the executive heads have been in post since the 1st of October, so those are shared roles. 10 of those were appointed in time for the 1st of October, and so they've been familiarising themselves with the councils, their colleagues and councillors. The team was very pleased to meet with councillors informally before the last council meeting, when we had a sort of informal meet and greet, and we conducted a very similar exercise at Guildford around about the same time. We have 2 vacancies within the team which are being filled on a temporary and interim basis at the moment while we are recruiting to those permanently. One of those roles will be the monitoring officer for the council, and so the recruitment will be overseen by the Joint Appointments Committee before recommendation to full council early in the new year. So our next steps, as I said earlier, that the councils have asked us to do is to start preparing business cases for further collaboration. So our organisational development team are preparing a methodology for doing that, and we'll be happy to share that with you as we proceed. Other than that, I was just going to mention the Joint Governance Committee that meets next month. I've mentioned that already, but that will cover the risks of the partnership and also the inter-authority agreement. And so, Chairman, I'll stop there for any further comments or questions.
Thank you. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Executive, are the business cases prepared in-house? In other words, without the use of consultants?
We don't plan to use any consultants at the moment. I think we have plenty of resources to be able to understand the business itself, because of course we've got so many more colleagues who are delivering those things and know them best. I wouldn't rule out consultants in the future, but we have no plans at the moment to use some. There might, on certain specific areas, be a requirement on something particularly technical. I don't have anything in mind on that at the moment, but we don't currently have any budget set aside for consultants, no plans at the moment for consultants, but they may have a purpose at some point during the collaboration, but we're currently working through the methodology in the first instance.
Thank you. I'm glad that it's being done in-house rather than using consultants. Sorry, who are quite expensive.
Thank you. Any other comments? No, in that case, thank you for that. We move on to item 9, the Sustainable Procurement Policy. Mr. Vickers, are you presenting on this? I see the author is Patrick Tweet. Ah, wonderful. over to you.
Hi, Patrick, are you presenting on this?
Yep, happy to, Peter. Evening, Chair. I'm bringing a sustainable procurement policy tonight. This is a policy, we don't have anything in place for our procurement function as it stands. The proposal is to put in place a sustainable procurement policy which will support the Council's corporate strategy.
Well, could I have a number of questions on this? It seems a very worthy aim, but when I see on page 4 of the paper, monitoring and measuring supplier performance against contractual environmental commitments, can you give some more details to who's actually going to do that and how you think it would be done? Because if we agree with someone to supply something, given all the comments we've heard about recruitment difficulties, there seems to be an extra burden which might be quite difficult to discharge. Could you comment on that, please?
Yep, happy to. So the expectation is with everything in this policy, it will be proportionate to the contract that it's being applied to. So, you know, for a low value, simple contract, there is no expectation that there will be significant resource intensive monitoring programs, but for contracts such as our refuse and recycling collection, our leisure contracts, even our repairs and voids contracts, not only are these reasonable expectations, but I think they are fundamental to the contract as well. So yes, they will be resource intensive, but for those significant council contracts, they are adequately resourced to be able to do that. And actually, in a lot of cases, that monitoring is already happening with regards to emissions.
In terms of frequency, I mean, are we talking about something happening very, very often, weekly or even monthly, or something less often, such as annual or semi-annual?
I've actually been very careful not to stipulate frequencies. So I've written this policy as the procurement officer, but ultimately it will be the officers who are responsible for the contract will be best placed to dictate frequencies. So that you'll see the policy is actually silent on how often things should occur.
I mean, are we very much like every other council just starting off in this area, or are there others who've been doing it for longer and there are any precedents which they've been using?
So this policy was written in conjunction with a bunch of other authorities. So I've been working with Surrey County Council, East Sussex Council, Brighton and Hove, as well as a working group of district and borough councils, all of whom will be looking to adopt similar policies around about the same time. I think we may be the first district or borough council in Surrey doing this, but the expectation would be that a lot of the others will follow, and you'd hope that good practice will be shared between contract managers.
Thank you. I mean, last couple of questions, more about understanding the terms that are used. Can you just explain what the circular economy is and what circular economy principles are?
Yeah, so circular economy principles are simply referring to looking at whole life costing of a product, as well as what will happen to it once we need to dispose of it. So it's just taking a longer term view of materials and goods, as opposed to that initial upfront, particularly in relation to the council's climate agenda, with regards to goods that we may purchase. We may want to factor in that although they may be cheaper to purchase initially, there may be high disposal costs or high environmental implications of disposing of those goods once their lifetime has expired.
Thanks, that's interesting. I was wondering whether it might mean that we'd prefer to buy things which could be recycled as opposed to those which couldn't. Which is saying
Yes.
actually, just looking at the cost of disposal will be one aspect of this.
Yeah, and there will always be a preference for recyclable products, and that's referenced in the policy as well.
And lastly, you refer once or twice to industry certifications. Can you give some more detail as to what these either are or will be?
Yeah, so as with the contract meetings, in the same way that I didn't specify any frequencies, I haven't specified industry certifications, purely because the officers who are involved, bearing in mind that the policy is a catch-all for any and all contracts, they will be best placed to apply and dictate what those standards are.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting there'd be examples, but are we expecting every industry with which we can track to have some form of national level certification process, which people who wish to do that particular form of business will have to ascribe to? And then we'll be checking to make sure that they have that appropriate level of quality, if you wish.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's reasonable of us to stipulate where you've got an industry-wide accreditation or standard. It's only right and proper of us to expect that, and to expect that suppliers who are bidding for our work in that area have such accreditations.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Anybody else? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. First a question, then a comment. There's a significant difference between good practice and best practice. I've worked with both. Best practice is onerous. Do you expect there will be any uplift in cost as a result of adopting best practice rather than good practice? I'll make a comment on the circular economy. The circular economy seems to be the direction that certainly the States is heading in, with a right to repair. Essentially, we're trying to recover materials rather than send them to landfill rather, or dump them in the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. With regards to your comments on best or good practice, I think we should always strive for best practice, but when we talk about cost implications, not wanting to undermine the policy does state that it will be applied where relevant, affordable and appropriate. So what we're not saying is everything that's being suggested in the policy should be done for every contract regardless, but officers should consider whether or not it is appropriate and affordable to factor these things in. I think there's an expectation that certainly some more onerous requirements will have cost implications, but actually, particularly in, say, the build environment, for example, what we've seen is where historically well-performing energy-wise buildings has always been historically as a very expensive luxury. What with the increase of energy costs at the moment, we should be taking a longer term view, and actually the increased upfront costs initially will be mitigated massively by the energy savings down the line.
Thank you.
Councillor Hegan.
Thank you. Generally, I think this looks like a really good policy, but I can see that it's going to result in increased work for officers in applying it over and above what they're doing currently, even if it's just to formalise things they've done informally. When are you looking to acquire data as we go as to the impact of working within this policy in terms of the difficulty in managing the tender process and the impact on the outcomes, so that when we come to review the policy, there is some live data that was acquired at the time, as opposed to maybe looking backwards 3 years anecdotally?
That's a very good question. I'll be honest, it's not something I had considered with regards to collecting data on. What I would say is we already factor in environmental impacts in our tenders, but at the moment the emphasis is placed on quality questions that we ask of bidders and then evaluate. The difference with that approach is you can still potentially have a provider winning the contract who may be the worst performing from an environmental perspective. What this policy is doing is saying actually we should build all these considerations and the work that goes with it up front when we are designing our specification, instead of leaving these things to chance with qualitative questions at the end. But I mean, with regards to capturing the data, that's obviously something I'm happy to look at.
Thank you. Councillor Howard.
I think it's a really commendable piece of work that's been done here. And I think we all did sign up pretty comprehensively to the climate change emergency. A policy like this is really important in terms of us being able to prove what we're doing. So I'm hugely supportive of it. I think it's really well written. I found it very useful.
Thank you. Final few questions from me on social value. And reading the examples, are these things which we would encourage a potential contractor to offer, almost as a form of voluntary CIL, if you wish, in order to give them added points, if you like, when they're being assessed for whether to get the contract or not?
Yes, in short, is one approach with regards to social value. Another reason we include social value in our quality questions is actually, by and large, most firms are already doing social value, regardless of if it's being requested of them by clients. So by including questions on social value, it simply gives these organisations the ability to showcase the work they're doing, which ultimately can help us differentiate them from firms that aren't taking such an approach.
No, thank you. That certainly sounds a far more practical way of doing it than us having to dream up things which we want competitive bidders to do. And as you say, if it's known that these are things which we're looking at, then that will encourage them to do it, as you say, on their own behalf anyway. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments on this? Otherwise, we note the report, welcome it, and look forward to seeing how it works in practice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to double check. Did you want to make a recommendation about Councillor Hegan's suggestion on capturing and recording officer time, or just leave that as a comment?
I'm happy to just leave it as a comment. I don't think it needs to be written into the policy per se, but I think it's worth consideration.
Right, moving on to item 10, which is the business transformation update. I see we've got the portfolio holder, Mr. Clark, as well as the new head of service, Robin Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it'd be a good idea, as we have a new head of organisational development, Robin Taylor, that I just make a small introduction before he takes the questions you may have on the latest business transformation report. I can confirm that I've met with Robin on 2 occasions, and we are both on the same page. We got on so well that we decided to sit beside each other this evening. Although in the collaboration with Guildford, heads of service are tasked with bringing forward business cases that will deliver savings and better service outcomes, Waverley's business transformation team will continue with its own plans for this council independently. And Robin Taylor is already working up these plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully the backward-looking part of this report is familiar to this committee. You've seen it a number of times before. As set out within the report on page 7, set out within the report, 7 of the 10 projects within phase 1 of Waverley's business transformation projects are complete. 2 are currently on pause and 1 is off track. And you can see that there in the pie chart. In terms of the recurring annual savings delivered by the programme, slightly under 663,000 is already delivered. 258,000 is forecast to be delivered within the original time period, and that leaves a gap of 128,000 against the original target. So actually pretty good performance there against the original savings target, but still a gap to be bridged in terms of our finances. As it says within the report, consideration does need to be given to what any further phases of the council's business transformation programme delivers in the future, not just in terms of savings, which will continue, I'm sure, to be part of the picture, but also in terms of supporting the council's other strategic objectives. And you'll see in the report that I've listed the types of drivers for business transformation that organisations such as this one will need to look at. So this is given to you at your request for information, Chair. The committee is asked to note the progress made to date and to make any comments with regards to future programmes. But just to echo Councillor Clark, obviously it is something that I'm new in post. Part of my job is to try and have a look at what we're doing around business transformation. I'll be consulting with a number of stakeholders on that, Councillor Clark certainly included, but I will welcome any comments from this committee about that going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, from my perspective, as you say, that confirms a situation that we were reasonably familiar with, and I think keeping on top of it as the future years pass. It won't be necessarily this particular committee, but the one that has that responsibility. It's important they keep an eye on it. What I would like to know is whether what was called Business Transformation 2, which is the next phase of changes, is that still an independent concept which is being worked on now, or is it being sort of folded into the collaboration projects, or is it something different again?
In terms of the titles that we give to things, whether it's called BT2 or something else, I don't think is the substance of your question. Although we have a joint management team, this partly comes back to Mr. Horwood's update, we have a joint management team, but we have 2 organisations. And so Waverley Council still needs to have it still has its own business transformation needs. And so part of what we need to do is to make sure that any business transformation that is required within Waverley Borough Council is delivered. Now, clearly, we have the full council's commitment to the collaboration initiative in as far as it's gone, and full council at Waverley has asked the new joint heads of service to bring forward their own proposals for further collaboration, which will then be considered by both councils. Now, it's very likely, and you won't be surprised to hear this, that any further proposals for further collaboration, at least some of those will be proposals for transformation activity. You can't have proposals for collaboration which are completely separate from transformational activity, because the collaboration initiative is itself a form of transformation of this organisation and Guildford Borough Council. So the short answer is there will continue to be transformation activity for Waverley, but there will also be most likely joint transformation activity in conjunction with Guildford, and that is clearly part of the collaboration programme if those business cases for further collaboration are approved.
So I'm not sure you have been quite as clear as I hoped. Does BT2 still have life on its own? And if so, what stage is it at?
It certainly does have life. And the stage it's at is that it's not fully fledged. I'm starting to collect from my own work and by discussing with colleagues and with councillors what that BT phase 2 is likely to look like. So it's certainly by no means pinned down. It's in the early stages of me beginning to gather those thoughts and ideas. We are at the moment definitely in an in-between phase. You can see that BT1 is pretty well developed. That doesn't mean that all of it was delivered, nor that all of the savings are locked in, but it's actually, it's done a vast majority of what we set out to do in BT1. BT2, or whatever we call it next, still needs to be delivered. And before we deliver it, we need to work out what it's going to look like. And that's the process I'm going through at the moment.
Thank you. Well, final question is, do you have some idea in terms of how many months it will take before BT2 is something which can be shown at least to have been designed?
I think it's probably an iterative process, but I would want us to get to the point where we understand what transformational activity is going to be delivered in the next financial year. It is probably the best way of describing it. So at the moment, we are in the middle of a financial year. We've got an existing programme. I would hope that at least part of that programme will be developed so that we can begin implementing it from next financial year. But I couldn't commit to that at the moment because I'm talking about something which hasn't been developed nor agreed. But it's a conversation that I'll certainly want to involve this committee in when we get there.
Thank you. Councillor Hegan.
I had a question actually, which I meant to ask under the performance report, but it does fit here. There is a comment in the performance report, page 24, to do with a harmonisation of IT and a need to align policies, let's be correct. And I was intrigued as to what bring your own devices. And as an example of alignment, how are we going to manage the process of, is it really going to be reviewing policy by policy things that are in there?
I can see Mr. Mills indicating. I don't know if you want to go to him first.
Mr. Mills.
Yes, thanks. I put this question to the new head of service for communications and customer service, who I think has responsibility for IT now, and they've given me a written answer, which I'm happy to read.
Okay.
It's only
Sorry, I thought
Oh.
IT was coming in this as well, but I'll wait for your answer.
Oh, yeah, I've got it, so I can read it.
Oh.
If that's helpful.
Do you want to read it out?
Sure. The discovery exercise around a shared tenancy focusing on Office 365 functionality has begun, and this will give us a better idea of the scale of what would be required to implement this and the level of alignment that would be required to achieve this. Until this is completed, we cannot comment on what would be needed or how extensive this will be. We will have a better idea early next year on whether this is a possibility. We do not expect the discovery work to flag the need. Sorry, we do expect the discovery work to flag the need for aligned policies and approaches, including around bring your own device to work. This is a policy that allows staff at Waverley to access Waverley systems securely on their personal devices, whereas for Guildford staff, access is through laptops issued by the council. Although other requests and areas for potential harmonisation will come through the business cases brought forward as part of the collaboration. So at this stage, there is no IT harmonisation task group. However, there are regular meetings between the Waverley and Guildford ICT teams to look at the options such as the shared tenancy, potential challenges, and to ensure the full ICT landscape is fully understood on both sides of the collaboration.
Well, that was an interesting answer. And I must admit, I am slightly surprised to hear there's no task group committed to this yet. Is that something which will be coming?
Certainly from my perspective, I don't know about the specific terminology of task groups, but I can tell you that the joint management team's already been looking as a priority at the question of shared tenancy, which Nicola's included in her update there. That is one of the priorities we're looking at, simply because it then enables so much other efficiency to take place. So don't want to speak for Nicola, although I would say, I would suggest you don't have any concerns about the lack of a particular task group. It is being looked at by the council's joint management team as a specific priority.
Thanks. Yes, I think the term tenancy is a sort of Microsoft term for what most of us would call contract, isn't it? It's the relationship between Microsoft and the user. Right. So, Councillor Hegan. You. Well, thank you for that. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? No? Well, thank you very much. Brings us up to date to the question which has been exercising this committee for some time. And this is, I think, the first time we've seen a pie chart showing how the different types of working are distributed. But my question is, I'm surprised to see that the second largest is obviously TBC, to be confirmed, and office workers actually are something of a minority. Is there any comment to be made on when we think the TBCs will be allocated?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So this report is on the agenda at your request. As set out within the covering report, the report follows two previous reports to this committee relating to staffing and hybrid working. The first was on the practical arrangements put in place by the business transformation team to enable hybrid working in terms of facilities and ICT. The second came from the HR team, and that was an up-to-date profile of the council's workforce and the guidance around the hybrid and agile working policy being implemented. So this report includes at paragraph 1.3 a reminder of the objectives of our new agile working policy, and at paragraph 1.5 the employee profiles that we've asked managers to identify. The chart on page 98, which you just referred to, Chairman, shows how the workforce has been classified to date. I would stress there's no concern about the fact that we have TBC as a slice of the pie. Probably if I wasn't called to bring this report to committee at this point, it wouldn't have been the exact timing I would have brought it forward, because this is a work in progress. It's something which was looked at as part of our annual appraisal process, but we didn't expect it to be complete by this time in any event. I'm happy to come back to you, Chairman, with a date at a later meeting as to when we could expect it to be finished. I can't give you that detail today, but this is very much just an update on where we are with that agile working policy. And it's just from a personal point of view, very interesting that some of the earlier comments around a range of areas when we were talking about the performance reports came back to recruitment, retention and reward, but also agile working, a recognition amongst committee members here that agile working is part of the offer for staff and part of the route through which we will be able to recruit and retain the right staff for the job. So it absolutely is an important area of work. I'm glad that the committee is giving it time on their agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I right to think that it shouldn't be an automatic assumption that the ability to work from home will necessarily be attractive to some sorts of staff, and in fact being able to work in the office for, again, some jobs is both important and desirable?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Chairman. There's two things always to look at when we're looking at this. First of all, there's what the job role requires, and then there's the individual preferences, both of which are really important. And clearly, like everywhere across the globe, office environments across the globe, we were thrown into this initially with the COVID pandemic. What we're now trying to do is come out of that in a planned way. This is our approach as an organisation, to trying to plan our approach to agile working rather than it still being based on an emergency response. The reason I raise that is that even in the depths of the lockdown, clearly there were some members of staff who either could not work from home in order to fulfil their job, or because of their job, or because of their personal circumstances could not or did not want to. And that's still absolutely the case. So there's two parts to this process. One is the managers identifying what type of role this is under one of those four profiles. And then the second part of the process is working out with the individual member of staff what suits them. So in particular, you may have a role, for example, that is classified as a hybrid worker role, but the person within it may be in the office every day, as an example. And that is one of the reasons why the process isn't over quite so quickly, because it's not just about a manager sitting down with a spreadsheet and ticking the boxes. It's about having that proper analysis of the role, but also following up with a conversation with the individual employee.
Thank you very much. I mean, would you expect this to be more or less finished by the end of this financial year?
Yes, by the end of the financial year. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Would anyone else like to comment? Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you. Two questions. How is productivity measured in terms of the hybrid working compared for working in the office? And the second is, when you work from home, there's a considerable cost saving. Does this create any staff friction? Thank you.
So through you, Chairman. And the first thing to say is in terms of staff productivity, we measure that in the way that we've always measured that, in terms of staff having objectives that are given to them, which link back through service plans and the corporate strategy. So that's what this process is all about. It's about understanding what each individual member of staff and each team is required to deliver, and then making sure that they deliver it, not necessarily regardless of agile working, but hopefully agile working will improve productivity. Certainly where we've seen improvements in performance at Waverley have been around sickness absence and things like that as a result of agile working. So I don't have concerns about productivity as a result of agile working. What I do see, and this comes back to the previous report that was submitted to this committee, we do see some positive effects of agile working in terms of our sickness stats, but also hopefully in terms of our retention as well.
Councillor Hegan.
I'm curious as to how this data is now feeding through into our requirement for office space, and at what point we may be able to convert some of these numbers on hybrid working and home working into a reduced requirement for space.
So through you, Chairman, we already have done that as an organisation. So we've reduced the number, the level of floor space that is given over to desks. I don't think we've reduced the amount of space that's given over to team working and meetings, because those things still happen in the office, but we don't have the same requirement for banks of desks as we used to have. And some of the savings, just going back to the previous item, some of the savings that you saw reported against BT phase 1 were exactly because of our reduction in space and the saving that's brought us in terms of our revenue savings.
I was thinking possibly this data was going to lead to a further step forward along that path.
So what we are monitoring every day is the number of employees who are in the building. So we're keeping a careful eye on that. We track how many members of staff come into the building, swiping in and out. And we also track the usage of the car park. And again, that's the way we've used the car park has also created some revenue for the council. But we will keep it under review. It's something which we can't be absolutely certain right now exactly what the pattern of working in this or any organisation looks like after the pandemic. We need to go through this winter, and there are, we are monitoring that data as we go through the winter and keep it under review.
So would it be fair to say that if we're hoping to fill all the TBCs by the end of this financial year, it will be into next financial year before this, so this could potentially be part of BT2?
Those two aren't entirely linked. So, sorry, I'm not sure. Can you repeat the question?
I'm really just thinking through whether we've got any potential further savings to realise when we crystallise more of the split between the various working models, as to whether there's further premises savings to be had, or we've already bottomed that out regardless of what this data tells us.
Okay. I think the best thing to say to that, Chair, is that's a good question, and it's a question that's on officers and managers' minds as well as your own. And so, yes, I'll come back to you on that, but I don't have an answer today on that.
No, I mean, I think one of the things which obviously comes to mind is that one needs to cater really for peak office occupation rather than average. And one of the things which has been often mooted is that if we have a very cold part of the winter, will that drive an awful lot of staff back into the office in the hope of being able to work in a rather warmer environment than at home. I've no idea whether there's any real substance to this, but until you've actually seen what the office use has been during a complete year, you won't know. Any other comments? Councillor Edmonds.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure whether I got an answer to my cost savings as regards to people working from home, which could create friction. I know Facebook was thinking of differentiating in terms of pay from people working at home and people working in the office. And so another question I've got is on sickness, because I thought a healthy organisation had a sickness ratio of about 3%, accepting that we've come through COVID. The sickness rate, I think, I remember is about 6%, seems to be quite high to me. Thank you.
Do you wish to comment?
One of the important things with sickness rates, as well as distinguishing between long-term and short-term, is looking at how we compare to similar organisations. And so when you compare Waverley Borough Council, as we do, we pick up benchmarking information on a regular basis. We compare very favourably at Waverley when compared to, for example, other Surrey districts and borough councils. So I do accept that point that, you know, any amount of sickness is something that we've got to watch, but comparatively speaking, our sickness levels are, you know, we are performing well.
Good, thank you. There's nothing else?
Yes, and can I just pick up the point about pay? There's no intention to differentiate in pay according to whether staff are working from home or whether they're working from the office. So you'll have seen from our agile working policy that's not how we're looking at this project.
So sorry, I agree. I wasn't looking for a differentiation in pay. It's whether it was creating friction.
Oh, I mean, we the only way we can monitor that is by talking to staff. Our line managers, you know, have guidance about how they are. Sorry, through you, Chair. They are supposed, you know, our line managers talk to their staff individually and also as teams, and they would need to pick up on any issues of friction between staff. But I'm not aware of that because of the approach we've taken, where it's adult to adult conversations between line managers and staff about the different worker profiles that we can offer and support with IT. We've not taken a draconian approach of saying, you know, there are very few people where we're telling them you absolutely are this worker type, regardless of, you know, of what you think. So it's a conversation. And if where you've got members of staff, for example, facilities officers who do have to be in the building every day, there's no friction there because that's the job they do. They don't expect to be working from home. So sorry, short version is, no, I don't think there is any friction arising from that.
Thank you.
No, I think it's something you wouldn't go looking for, but if it suddenly reared its head in a big way, you'd have to react. Right, thank you. On that basis, can we note the report? Thank you. And thank you for it too. It's an important issue and it's something we do want to keep an eye on. At this point, we move to item 12 and the exclusion of the present public. Can I have the committee